What is up, guys? It's the Sound Alchemist, part of OneMindSyndicate, and today I'm back to talk about Warhammer 40k. Now, we all know that the Emperor is one of the most important characters in the entire history of the universe, of the Warhammer narrative. This guy has been ushering humanity to basically ascend to the next stage of evolution. He's the reason why humanity has so many factions that are out to defend them. He could also be the reason why the entire galaxy will be coming to an end, because potentially he could be becoming the fifth Chaos God, the Dark King. However, before we get to actually finding out what will happen in the final installment of the Death and the End Volume 3, the main battle between Horus and the Emperor, before we do all this theory crafting and trying to figure out how the Emperor will attain these wounds that will inter him on the Golden Throne, let's take a look at his humanity, the personality of this almost unlimited, powered God King. So without further ado, let's go ahead and discuss the events that happened in The End and the Death Volume 2 that pits Erda speaking to another Perpetual, John Grammaticus. So if you don't know who these two characters are, they're both Perpetuals. John Grammaticus is basically like an agent of the Cabal. He's trying to make the best outcome for the galaxy. He's also a psyker. And then we have Erda. Erda's a pretty new character. She's essentially the mother of the Primarchs. Half of her genetics and half of the Emperor's genetics were used to create the Primarchs. Now, Erda is a really powerful combatant, and she's also a Perpetual, and it is heavily implied that she had some type of a relationship with the Emperor. She knows a lot about who the Emperor actually is, as opposed to who the Emperor portrays himself as. So let's go ahead and take a look at the history of the Emperor. I believe the Perpetuals, she said, which have been appearing for at least the last 45,000 years, are abnormally advantageous mutations. The theory suggests that we are what you might call Homo superior, the next step along for the triumphantly successful Homo sapiens. We are the next evolutionary form that our species is intended to take. Intended? He echoed and frowns. She raised her hand apologetically. That was the wrong word. I do not subscribe to the idea of a divine plan or the work of God. I meant the process of nature, advancing a species, enhancing it. I believe that the Perpetuals are the early appearances of the next generation of humans, freak outliers appearing in very small numbers in advance of the evolutionary curve. And I believe, not because nature has any sort of plan, but because we are a fully sentient species, that our purpose is to shape and guide the human race, marshal its course and trim its sails, use our gifts and longevity to drive it towards the future, to the point at which we are the new normal, to the point at which Homo sapiens collectively become Homo superior. And that's what your kind does? Asks John. Generally, most through individual efforts. There are very few of us after all. Some have chosen to, some have chosen not to. They have relished their gifts and elected to indulge their lifetimes, succumbing to the whims of their personalities. For we are still human, some of us selfish, some insular, some petty, some lacking in altruism or empathy, with no care for the fate of the rest of humankind. In one instance I know of, one was psychopathic. That's a story I would like to hear, says John. And I'll tell it sometime, for it was long ago. She looks down, thoughtful. And of course, there are some who have not wanted to play the role. Alanius is a great example of that. He is, I think, the oldest of us. He was always a man of faith, for he was born in an age when God seemed real. He was never able to shake off the religious aspect of the birth of his culture. Alanius didn't believe that Perpetuals should meddle in the affairs of man. He thought the guidance of the human race was God's work alone. So he stepped aside and lived his life over and over again, never taking part. He wasn't the only one. And the Emperor? Erda grimaced. You know, I loathe that term. It speaks to every part of his arrogance. Does he have a name otherwise? Many. He has had many names over the millennia, none of them his own. I have no idea if he ever has had a true name, but I knew him as Neoth. Neoth? His name is Neoth? John shook his head. That's crap. And a huge disappointment. No, that's just how I knew him. It was what he called himself when I met him. We were roughly covial. When was that? In the time of the first cities. He was a warlord even then, a king, and he was doing exactly what most of my kind do. He had taken on the stewardship of the human race. He had a greater understanding of the universe than anyone. Such was his power. He saw the dangers of the warp, the fragility of humanity, and the recurring flaws of our species. Credulity, anger, false faith, yearning. Everything that was terrible and also wonderful about humanity. When I met him, he had already begun his path to shepherd mankind towards a brighter future. She looked at John. I believed in him. I adored him. Most of us did. It was hard not to love him, hard not to be in awe of him. Harder still, to perceive the dangers of his ambition. He wanted to achieve what most of us dreamed of, and he had the will and power to do it. Not just simply do it, but do it faster and more completely than any perpetual could. He had the means to accelerate our efforts and accomplish in just a few generations what might others take millions of years. John drew up a stool and sat down facing her. Go on, he urged. Over time, he located and tried to recruit every single perpetual on Earth, said Erda softly. Some of us joined him, others decided not to. Some of us fought him. Several of the greatest conflicts in world history were caused by rival perpetuals trying to thwart his program. Did you know that? I suspected so, said John. He prevailed, John, though there were eras when he was badly set back. Over time, disaffection grew among our kind. Even the best of us could barely keep up, and I think he resented that. He is quite ruthless, and he is astonishingly arrogant. I suppose it would be hard not to be if you were him. For he was always right. He never looked for advice or counsel. He reshaped the world and drove it forward. He would not be questioned on the merit of his plan. To do so was heresy. John raised his eyebrows. Hilarious. But you stayed at his side? For far longer than I should have, she replied. Most of us divorced ourselves from his efforts. He was taking risks. One by one, perpetuals allied to him slipped away. He was glad to see the back of them, I think. He was tired of their objections, weary of their caution. He wanted results. He became angry with the minds that he could not match his speed of thought and his genius with. So most of us left him. They went away into other lives, or went into hiding, or left the homeworld. A few stayed. The Sigillite, of course. He was always married to the cause, and as I say, I stayed longer than I should have. Erda, what risks was he taking? John asks. The acceleration. He had no patience. He believed he knew everything he needed to know. He constantly pushed ahead, and that's the irony. We are immortal, but he couldn't bear to waste time. Natural evolution takes millions of years, and he refused to wait that long. He worked for 20, 30,000 years and felt that was more than time enough. The natural stewardship of the perpetuals born through the evolutionary cycle was not rapid enough for his needs. So once most of the natural perpetuals have left his side, he built his own. The Primarchs, John whispered. Indeed, the Primarchs, she said. They're not actual perpetuals in any biological sense. They're artificial equivalents of the perpetuals, functionally immortal beings born from his blood and power and vigor, coded to accelerate his program even faster. They were designed to live long enough to see his plan through to the end, and not die away so quickly, the way humans did. And they were also indoctrinated from birth to follow his word and not have opinions of their own, like naturally occurring perpetuals. They were made to service his dream. He took what nature had wrought in the Perpetuals, and he built his own. And once they were born, I began to properly understand the future he had prepared for them, the bitter destiny, the aggressively rapid and unnatural savage evolutionary jumpstart he was driving towards. No good ever comes of coercing nature, John. Through his sons, he would force the human race into the future, force it into submission, and defy the warp to do it. He had built artificial perpetual analogs and weaponized them, ready to resist the unbending cosmos. He was planning a crusade to retake the stars, to claim back in a bloody century or two what had taken millennia to lose in the first place. And that is when I stepped away. And there you have it, guys. This is what the Emperor was striving to all along. He was not ready to wait for nature to take its course, and so he took the reins on for himself, and that is why he created the Perpetuals. They were indeed a means to an end, a tool to be used to usher in humanity's forced evolution to allow humankind to regain the galaxy, to reconquer the stars, and ultimately, it is this arrogance that has put the Emperor in the state that he currently is. Throughout the heresy, we see what these Primarchs have done. They have basically created a schism for the gods to materialize into the galaxy through conduits such as Horus and demons, and they're trying to usurp the power and claim it for themselves. At the same time, the Emperor is fighting this back to have this galaxy be one not for the warp, but for humanity. And at the end of the day, when humankind kind of realizes this, or at least the Perpetuals realize this, you can see that the Emperor isn't as benevolent as you once thought. The Emperor isn't this god that is here to bless you and save you from the horrors of the warp. He's here to usher in his own ideals, his own mindset, and at the end of the day, his own arrogance to prove to himself that he is the one. Because at the end of the day, he called himself Neoth, which is a term that basically means he is the one, the only. And because of this, there can be no others alongside him. So all these Perpetuals that he brought on his side, the Space Marines, the Primarchs, everything has all been to a singular means, and that is for the Emperor to prove to himself that he can do it. He can do what nobody else has done, and he is really close to achieving that. Whether he wanted to become a god or not, that is kind of still up in the air, but it seems more likely than not than this godhood that he is trying to kind of hold off is creeping up on him. The Dark King was foretold, and it is a perpetual ideology that kind of has been going throughout the Horus heresy into the 40K universe, that the Emperor is achieving apotheosis and he is becoming a god, sitting upon the golden throne, and this is what's going to usher humanity to their next stage of evolution. Will we see this come out in fruition? Who knows? But before we get to that, we got to see where the End and the Death Volume 3 ends, so we can get a better grasp as to what the future holds into the future of the 42nd millennia. So with that being said, guys, let me know your thoughts down below. Do you think the Emperor was too arrogant? Do you think the Emperor is doing all this for himself or for the betterment of humanity? And yeah, we'll keep the conversation going. So again, guys, if you guys like what we do here at OneMindSyndicate, like, comment, subscribe, share this video to your friends, and let's keep the conversation on the Emperor going. As always, it's the Sound Alchemist, part of OneMindSyndicate, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next one. Peace.